No, that's very good advice. Dan, you've been extremely generous with your time, and I know everyone is very much they're learning a lot, appreciating your point of view. I did just ask you just a couple more quick questions because I'm sure folks out there
Sure.
are wondering where you see things going. I mean, you detail things in your on your website very well, and I think most folks that are familiar with you are pretty familiar with your ideas about the market and this country and the debt level and everything else. What do you have like your own personal forecast? What are some things we should be watching for as the year goes along here? And I mean, are you anticipating overt quantitative easing anytime soon? What's on your radar at this point, Dan?
Well, the way I see it turned right now, I mean, and I think pretty much in the gold community, we're all on the same consensus that the reason that we're seeing the equity markets where they are right now is really because of liquidity injections being put in place by the Western central banks, whether it's the ECB, whether it's the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, the Fed. Just pick the bank. They're all pretty much practicing some form of either QE or zero or near zero monetary, interest rate policy for monetary policy. Not only that, you have a huge amounts of debt being racked up by these, Western governments and Western economies. Down in the long haul, I think this is the thing is, long haul, all of us are bullish gold and silver, and I think we ought to be simply for the fact that we're looking at the fundamentals, we're looking at the huge amount of indebtedness. Here's the deal, Turd, in my opinion. We have so much debt in the United States at this point. Yet the mathematics are now, in my mind, prohibitive against this thing ever being paid down. I personally just don't see how you could ever get the country to grow at a fast enough clip that you could literally reduce the indebtedness or at least pay it off. I mean, that's never going to happen. Even if you got growth rates to the rate of China, let's say we were in the U.S. to a growth rate of 8%. I mean, how in the world would that even be possible? I just, we'll be doing good if we get to 3 and I think if we got to 4%, people would be doing cartwheels in the aisle. So I don't see long term. I don't see how the U.S. debt is ever going to get paid off. And what that tells me is that ultimately, at some point, and I don't know exactly when it's going to occur. I think if we all did, we could all buy our own private island in the South Pacific and name it after ourselves. But the point is, eventually the dollar is going to have to be devalued. That's the only way they're going to be able to pay this debt back. They'll have to pay it back in dollars that are valued less than where they are today. Long term, that bodes very, very well for gold and silver. And again, the fundamental factors that have led to the rise in gold and silver prices have not really changed. What we're dealing with right now, as you and I are talking, Turd, is, we're seeing, we saw a downdraft in gold, we saw a downdraft in silver, but this is more of a short-term aberration. I mean, we've seen a lot of these these sell-offs like this going on, since 2001. So again, this is nothing new to witness this. And each time the metals, sell off, the same guys come out of the closet, predicting the demise of the bull market. But here's the deal. Has the fundamentals that have led to the rise of gold and silver and to the weakness in the dollar, have they really abated? Well, temporarily they've been papered over, but the structural problems, the huge sums of indebtedness, which is really to me the big issue here, the amount of debt in the system, have never really been addressed. They've just been papered over. So as long as those things are in operation, as long as the central banks basically are printing money or are having near zero interest rate policies in place, you're in an environment that's conducive to the metals rise in the long term. So that's why when these sell-offs occur, I know they're disconcerting for people out there in the precious metals community. Of course, we all like to see the metals go straight up and without stopping, but generally when they do that, then they have violent sell-offs. These occasional sell-offs, these retracements in price are actually healthy. And the reason they are is because the big thing about the gold market in particular is every time you get a drive to a new high, whether it's a new lifetime high, whether we hit 1,000, whether we hit 1,200, 14, 16, and eventually 19, it's always the same thing. There's always a little bit of sticker shock among the end users simply when they go to buy that and they look at the price and their heart starts skipping a beat over there. And so what happens is this market moves lower, and then it consolidates for a while. It goes sideways, whatever. But what that basically does is it acclimatizes people to this new and higher price level. I liken it to kind of like on a cold day. It's 0 degrees. You're in a warm house at 70. You step outside, and man, the initial shock is like, holy moly, man, and it just slaps you in the face. But once you spend some time out there and you're moving around, eventually you get used to it. You're acclimatized to it. It doesn't bother you as much. It's the same thing with these markets. The end users, the big buyers of the physical metal, need time to get acclimated to these higher prices. And so when you get these periodic retracements in the price of the metals, that's exactly what it allows them. It allows them to kind of get used to paying a higher price, but the higher price is being paid at a higher level. That's the thing. Go back and look at where gold was a year ago. Go back and look at where gold was 2 years ago. And you can see, it's been a steady climb. And so I don't particularly worry too much about it, although, like I said, sometimes I wish the sell-offs weren't quite so dramatic, because they shake a lot of guys out of the market as far as our longer-term holdings go, and they get rattled, and then they're wondering if they ought to even be in precious metals, where I think they're making a mistake. But anyhow, going back to what you had asked me earlier, longer term, my views on where we're going, unless I see some sort of total revamping of our monetary policy, our structural problems in our economy turd, I don't see anything changing that would cause me to change my views of where gold and silver are going ultimately. The U.S. has some serious problems. So does Western Europe. So does Japan. Japan's not only has a problem with their economy, although their economy is slightly improving, but they have a problem. Their demographics now are working against them over there too. Their birth rate has fallen so low that they have a problem there. And those things all add up. And when you look at the growth rate in developing nations like India and China, and you look at the growth rate of the nations out in the West, you can see where economic power is going to be moving. It's going to gradually be moving from west to east. And then that's, the idea that the U.S. would remain the center of economic power, like it's some sort of birthright, is not true. We have to have good policy. We have to have good politicians. We have to have good, monetary and fiscal policy to maintain that. And if we don't, then we'll do like any other great nation or empire in history. We'll slide backward. And that's the thing that concerns me, not only as a trader, as an investor, but just as a citizen of the country. Obviously, I want these problems taken care of, but we need to have the political will to do it.
And not much of that coming over the horizon at this point, that's for sure. And there's no reason to think that's going to change. I guess my last question for you, I intend to spend more time on this topic in the coming weeks and months, and so it just leads me to think I should just ask you while I got you on the line. There's this. If you were born, I guess, any time after about the time my dad was born in 1929, so his whole awareness at 82, Dad, I'm sorry, I'm using you as an example if you're listening.
Well, that's good. I thought you were going to tell the listeners I was born in 1929 too.
And Dan was in my dad's high school class. They've been friends for life. That's how I know him. And my mother would say, of course, that my dad married her when she was 5. So that, but anybody that's my dad's age and younger, and there are not a lot of those people, around, and getting to be less and less. All they know is U.S. hegemony in world affairs, in military affairs, in economic affairs, everything. That's their only experience, and 99% of the people out there only can function and only operate within their own worldview, their own experience. They can't even begin to plate that tomorrow will be different from yesterday. I see clearly, I just try to think of it, if I were in charge, because of course I kind of have, I'm a little bit megalomaniacal, I think, as everyone knows. If I was in charge of a creditor nation of the U.S., I would be moving toward, knowing the math, what it is, I would be moving toward a day where I can take my currency and partially back it with hard assets to bring it to a status of the current reserve currency. If anything, and I'm specifically thinking about the Chinese because they have 1.2 billion people, they will have an interest in, let's say, pacifying them in the same way that the American politicians pacified the American population for the last 40 years with free stuff. And if the Chinese become some type of regional or global reserve currency, they will have the luxury that the United States has had for the last 40 years of just freely printing money and exporting the inflation to other parts of the globe. So I see that coming. I think I told you this platform is not for me to talk, so now here I am talking.
Well, no, Turd, I like that, Turd. I agree with your assessment. I really do, and that's the point. we have not in our nation. We have not really the generation. I'm speaking, generally here, but the current generation doesn't know anything besides having the U.S. dollar as the center, the center of the global currency market. They just don't. They've never known anything else. And it's to me, you have to go back to think about the British pound. The sun. What was the boast? The sun never sets on the British Empire. Hail Britannia, Britannia rules the seas. And anywhere you went around the globe, there was a colony of Britain somewhere. And of course, the British pound was the global reserve currency. And the idea was, if somebody would have said to you back in the let's say 1900, 1901, 1902, that the pound would be displaced by this upstart country, the America, and by the U.S. dollar, somebody would have probably laughed at you at that time. But obviously, it happened. It did change. I mean, you had World War I left Great Britain with a tremendous amount of debt from which they never recovered, really. And then World War II was like the final straw that broke the camel's back. And obviously, when Bretton Woods basically set the dollar as a global reserve currency there, everything changed. And the idea was that, all right, the British pound is no longer the center of the global currency universe. Well, the same conditions that led to the demise of the pound, as the global reserve currency, can now be seen in the history of the United States. I mean, the same sort of conditions, huge amount of indebtedness, loss of manufacturing, loss of the things that were essential to Britain's great buildup as a powerful empire, as a powerful nation. And the nation began to decline. Now, as an American citizen, I don't like to talk about things like that. It's uncomfortable for me to even talk about it because I'm talking about the future that my children have to inherit. But the fact is, the warning signs are there. The same sort of conditions are there, and the fact that you're getting so much noise from some of these developing countries, whether it's Brazil or China or Russia, whatever it is, more or less kind of frustrated that the dollar still remains at the center of the global currency universe, and it allows the U.S. to be so undisciplined in its monetary policy. There's a lot of resentment that these nations have, and rightfully so. And at some point, you will see a move, further and further away from the dollar. Now, it may take 5 years, it may take 10 years, 15, 20 years. I don't know. I don't really know what the timetable is, but I think it's coming, and I really do. And I think at that time, you're going to have the same sort of feelings in the U.S. citizenry at large that the Great Britain, the Brits must have experienced when their pound was no longer the center of the currency universe. So I think what we can just do is watch, monitor, see what's going on. Maybe hope that we get some guys in there who really understand these things and can institute some structural change in the nation. But either way, it's going to be very politically unpopular to do those sorts of things. So you wonder whether we're actually going to be able to address these problems and deal with them, or else we're just going to fade and kind of slowly go the way of Britain.
Well, on that happy note, Dan.
Yeah, well, I'm on the window ledge in my house right now, Turd, and I'm ready to jump. But that's one of the reasons my office is on the first floor here, because the thing that can happen to me is when I jump, I can just break the azalea bushes. That's all that happens.
That's good forward planning, Dan. That's risk.
That's why we're traders here, buddy. We always look ahead. That's right.
Oh, Dan, gosh, very much for spending some time. I really appreciate it. I hope that we get an opportunity to visit again sometime soon, because you've got such a vast wealth of experience to share, but also you've got it. I think you've obviously got it figured out as to where we're going and how to prepare for what lies ahead. So I encourage everybody to put Dan's Blogspot site onto their favorites list. Again, the link is right there in the text of this cast. You want to check there. He's unable, because he's just so darn busy, to update it every day. But I'd stop there at least every day, just in case he did. The information he puts on there is always valuable. And Dan, I want to thank you for spending some time here in Turdland, and I hope we're able to visit again sometime soon.
Well, Turd, I have really, really enjoyed this. It's always a pleasure to visit Turdland and see the various sites here in this wonderful land. So thanks for having me. I definitely look forward to doing this again. We'll do this in the future here, and hopefully all the listeners had a good time just listening to us chat amongst
Next time
a couple
we'll
of good
both maybe have a beer while we're talking. How's that? That might be...
Now that could get really interesting. That'd be lots of fun. There's no telling what would come out on that interview.
All right, thank you, Dan. You have a good weekend.
Same to you, Turd. Take care now, buddy.